Welcome to another world history class. The world is not as simple as it appears. Not as simple. And world history tells us how complex the world is and where we are coming from. We are coming from a great distance. Let us pause a prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the participants in this course. Thank you for the system that you have provided, Lord, to make this course possible. I commit myself to you and ask for your blood coverage and protection and preservation and guidance and leadership. And I pray your blessings now upon the system and upon all of us. In the precious name I pray, amen. So we're going to proceed by looking at the big topic, the rise of civilization in the Middle East and Africa. What we had civilization outside of this context before, but civilization because it was far more improved than what had obtained before. Right? Cattle, Huyuk, and Jericho, far more improved. And Jericho is somewhere there in the Middle East, yes, and within the vicinity of the Jordan River, which became part of Israel today. But we're going to continue looking at the area. The Middle East takes in that area. The central subject of this chapter is the nature of river valley civilization and its manifestations in two key places. River valley civilization hold to that because civilizations then started in river valleys, and we shall come to them, so I won't have to preempt them. River valleys. The first full civilization emerged 3500 BCE in Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. That would be the Tigris and the Euphrates. And these rivers used to overflow the banks. So the topsoil and the land between the rivers was very rich. And that's how it is now, and that's how it used to be in river valleys. The topsoil is rich because the water, when the water overflows now and if overflowed then, the water was carrying rich topsoil. So by overflowing it spread the topsoil and land. By 3000 BCE, civilization developed along the Nile in Egypt. These early civilizations had several distinctive political and cultural features. Egypt's focus on the afterlife, for example, concentrated with Mesopotamian beliefs in people being buffeted by fate. Both civilizations generated a number of traditions that can still be found in civilizations around the Mediterranean, in parts of Europe, and even across the Atlantic. And cattle Huyuk is in Turkey. They experience civilization, and within the context of the time, it was far above the other social organizations in which people organize to live, and also Jericho. But it would seem as if those civilizations did not continue to live and grow. So either they had collapsed or they stagnated, but other civilizations overtook them. Both civilizations generated a number of traditions that can still be found in civilization around the Mediterranean part of Europe and even across the Atlantic. By 1000 BCE, when new problems brought the river valley period to an end, new problems. Nothing lasts, in this world of dynamism. Nothing lasts forever. Both of these early civilizations had influenced other cultures in Eastern Africa and Southern Europe, and additional centers in the Middle East. Agriculture and the rise of civilization. Setting the scene, the Middle East by 4000 BCE. Agriculture and the rise of civilization. Much time elapsed between the development of agriculture and the rise of civilization between the Middle East and elsewhere. Most successful agricultural communities that produced just enough to sustain the local population. Even the formation of small regional centers such as Jericho and Katal Huyuk did not ensure rapid change. Agriculture did encourage new forms of social organization. However, settled agriculture usually implied some concept of property rights in land identified as belonging to a family, village, or landlord. Owning property was an incentive to make improvements, such as wells or irrigation ditches that could be controlled by those who created them or left to their heirs. But property rights meant new kinds of laws and enforcement mechanisms, which in turn implied more extensive government. That means government started to become more complex. One person couldn't do it, and a group of 10 just couldn't do it all by themselves. So you had to have different parts. Bureaucracy started to develop now. In many early agricultural areas, building and maintaining irrigation ditches and sluices depended on cooperation among farmers. Irrigation needs, as well as fear of marauders, led most early agricultural peoples to settle in village communities rather than on isolated farms. Large gangs of laborers created irrigation projects along major rivers, such as the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile. The scale of political and economic organization increased as regulations were developed to ensure equal access to the water supply. Regulations and laws. Whether they could write or not, they knew them. Because once they were hammered out and communicated, you had to hold it. It is no accident that the earliest civilizations arose along large rivers and amid irrigation projects. Civilization in Mesopotamia and then Egypt involved not only the essential fact of economic surplus, but also the ability to integrate tens, even hundreds of square miles along rivers. Such regional coordination could easily lead to other contacts among communities, shared cultures including artistic styles and religious beliefs, economic contacts including trade, and more formal political institutions. And you notice, however primitive the group was, the society was, it had a religion. Religion might be foolishness, but compared to our standard, but they had a religion. The first civilizations also needed the technological developments that emerged about 4000 BCE. These new inventions enhanced the productivity of Eastern agriculture, creating more consistent surpluses that would ultimately help define civilization itself. The first potter's wheel, invented by about 6000 BCE, allowed people to produce higher quality ceramics, making food storage easier. A group of specialized manufacturing workers emerged to make pots to exchange for food produced by others. Mhm. The wheel was another Middle Eastern innovation. Around 4000 BC, wheel vehicles long remained slow, but they were vital to many monumental construction projects in which large blocks of stone were moved to the construction sites of temples. Shipbuilding also improved gradually. The introduction of bronze, again around 4000 BCE, allowed a greater variety of tools than could be made of stone or bone, and the tools were lighter and more quickly made. The Middle East was the first region to move from the Neolithic Stone Age to the Bronze Age as people developed metal, hoes, plows, and weapons. And remember, early on we saw how bronze came about. Tin mixed with copper created bronze. Again, new technology produced or promoted further specialization as groups of artisans concentrated on metal production, exchanging their wares for food. Bronze technology also promoted more formal political structures because bronze weaponry gave organized armies new means of control. Use of bronze also necessitated trade. Middle Eastern traders ultimately found the components of bronze, copper, and tin. A component. Bronze was made of the components copper and tin in places as distant as Afghanistan and England, along with irrigation. Then, new technologies were the framework for the emergence of civilization with the rise of Sumerian society along the Tigris Euphrates Valley, Sumer. The Sumerians, we're going to look at the Sumerians and their civilization. The first civilization rose in the northeastern section of what we now call the Middle East, along the great Tigris and Euphrates rivers that lead to the Persian Gulf. And that is taking it out of Africa. Well, some people will contend with that, but let us not get into the contention. Between the northern hills and the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, running from the eastern Mediterranean coast to the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, lies a large swath of arable land called the Fertile Crescent. Right, now let me read it again. The Fertile Crescent, and crescent doesn't mean full, it does mean an orb area. It's between the northern hills and the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. That is an area between Egypt and Arabia, running from eastern Mediterranean coast. The Mediterranean is this way, so the eastern coast to the plains of the Tigris, and Euphrates, so it takes in Mesopotamia, lies a large swath of arable land called the Fertile Crescent. The rivers overflow their banks in the spring, depositing fertile soil when they recede. Rainfall is scant, so as population pressure increased as a result of early agriculture, farming communities began to find ways to tame and use the rivers through irrigation ditches. With the improved tools of the Bronze Age, developments in the region were swift. The fertile Tigris-Euphrates region generated large food supply surpluses, promoting population growth and village expansion as well as increased trade and specialization. The region was vulnerable in one respect. It was so flat that it was open to invasion. The final boost toward establishing civilization was provided by the Sumerians, a people who had migrated into the area from the north about 4000 BCE. They settled in an area of about 700 square miles, where they mixed with other local people in a pattern that has remained characteristic of the region. The Sumerians early developed centers of religion, pilgrimage, and worship. Well before 3000 BCE, many of these centers boasted elaborately decorated temples built of mud bricks. Sumerians were impressed with the power of grim gods who they believed ultimately controlled human destiny. It was the Sumerians who introduced the first alphabet, capping the developments that created Mesopotamian civilization. Sumerian political and social organization. Sumerian culture remained intact until about 2000 BCE. Its political organization was based on a series of tightly organized city-states in which an urban king who claimed great authority ruled the agricultural hinterland. In some cases, local councils advised the king. One of the functions of Sumerian city-states was to define boundaries, unlike the less formal territories of pre-civilized villages in the region. Each city-state helped regulate religion and enforce its duties. It also provided a system of courts for justice. Kings were warriors whose leadership of a trained army in defense and war remained vital in Sumerian politics, where fighting loomed large. Kings and priests controlled vast amounts of land. Slaves who had been conquered in wars with nearby tribes worked this land. Sumerian political and social organizations set up traditions that long endured in the region. City-state government established a tradition of regional rule, which sometimes yielded to larger empires, but often returned as the principal organizational form. Many successor civilizations also relied on the slave labor. The use of slaves and the lack of natural barriers to innovation helped explain recurrent warfare, which was needed to supply labor in the form of captured slaves. The Sumerians, aided by political stability and the use of writing, added to their region's economic prosperity. Farmers learned how to cultivate date trees, onions, and garlic. Oxen were used to pull plows, and donkeys carried goods. Wheeled carts helped transport goods. The Sumerians introduced the use of fertilizer and adopted silver as a means of exchange for buying and selling. Major cities expanded. One city reached a population of over 70,000 with substantial housing units in rows of flat roofed mud brick shops and apartments. More commonly, cities contained as many as 10,000 people. The Sumerians improved the potter's wheel, and the production of pottery expanded. Spurred by the increasing skill level and commercial importance of pottery, men began to take this trade away from women. The Sumerians also invented glass. Trade expanded to the lower Persian Gulf and to the western portion of the Middle East along the Mediterranean. By 2000 BCE, the Sumerians had trading contacts with India. By 2000 BCE, the Sumerians had trading contacts with India. They were on the same continent, but they were separated by huge rivers. That is something I don't know if these historians will look at the means of transportation. They have mentioned the overland transportation, carts, wheeled carts drawn by animals, but they have not mentioned water transportation and how they managed to cross rivers. Sumerian culture and religion. Writing, the most important invention between the advent of agriculture and the age of the steam engine, was introduced about 3500 BCE. Yes, so the Sumerian invention of writing, it was they who invented writing, probably was rather sudden, based on new needs for commercial property and political records, including a celebration of the deeds of proud local kings. Writing was preceded by the invention of clay, cylinder, seals on which little pictures of objects could be recorded. The earliest Sumerian writing evolved from those pictures baked on clay tablets, which were turned into symbols and gradually transformed into phonetic elements. The early Sumerian alphabet, a set of symbols representing sounds, may have had as many as 2,000 symbols derived from the early pictures. Soon writers began to use more abstract symbols to represent sounds, which allowed the Sumerians to reduce the alphabet to about 300 symbols. Sumerian writers used a wedge-shaped stick to impress the symbol on clay tablets. The symbols. The resulting writing is called cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped, and it was used for several thousand years in the Middle East for many different languages. Cuneiform writing was difficult to learn, so specialized scribes monopolized it. The Sumerians believed that every object in nature should have a separate name to ensure its place in the universe. Knowing the name gave a person some power over the object. In other words, writing quickly took on religious purposes, allowing people to impose an abstract order over nature and the social world. The Sumerians also steadily elaborated their culture, again using writing to advance earlier forms of expression. By about 2000 BCE, they wrote down the world's oldest story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which went back at least to the 7th millennium BCE. In oral form, Gilgamesh, described as ruler of a city-state, became the first hero in world literature. The epic describes a great flood that wiped out humankind except for a favored family, which survived by building an ark and producing descendants who formed a new race of people. The overall tone of the epic and of Sumerian culture, perhaps reflecting regions of disastrous floods, was somber. Gilgamesh does great deeds but constantly bumps up against the iron laws of the gods, who ultimately control human destiny. Along with early literature, Sumerian art and science developed steadily. Statues and painted frescoes adorned the temples of the gods, and statues of the gods decorated homes. Sumerians sought to learn more about the movement of the sun and stars, thus founding the science of astronomy and to improve their mathematical knowledge. The Sumerian system of numbers based on units of 12, 60, 360 is the one we use today in the calculations involving cycles and hours. Sumerian charts of major constellations have been used for 5,000 years in the Middle East and through later imitation in India and Europe. In other words, Sumerians and their successors in Mesopotamia created patterns of observation and abstract thought about nature on which many later societies, including our own, still rely. Religion played a vital role in Sumerian culture and politics. Gods were associated with various forces of nature. At the same time, gods were seen as having human form and many of them more disagreeable human characteristics. Thus the gods often quarreled and used their power in selfish and childish ways, which made interesting stories but also created a fear that the gods might make life difficult. The gloomy cast of Sumerian religion also included an afterlife of suffering, an original version of the concept of hell. Because gods were believed to regulate natural forces, such as flooding, in a region where nature was often harsh and unpredictable, they were more feared than loved. Priests' power derived from their responsibility for placating the gods through prayers, sacrifices, and magic. Priests became full-time specialists, running the temples and performing the astrono- no, astronomical calculations. Astronomical studied. Well, it has to do with astronomy, studying the movement of the stars and heavenly bodies, and that, according to them, determine weather patterns and so on. So they would know, they would use that to predict seasons of flooding, when it would flood, the season in which flooding would take place, which were needed to manage the irrigation system. Each city had a patron god, and erected impressive shrines to honor this god and other deities. Massive towers called ziggurats form the monumental architecture for this civilization. Prayers and offerings to prevent floods and protect good health were a vital part of Sumerian life. Animism, the idea that a divine force lay behind and within natural objects, such as rivers, trees, and mountains, was common among agricultural peoples. Animism. Every object represents some divine elemental force. But specifically, Sumerian religion or religious beliefs about the creation of the earth by the gods from a chaos of water and about divine punishment through floods continue to influence Jewish, Christian, and Muslim cultures. You see, these people somehow they manage to or they have printed in their hearts and in their minds certain elements of truths, but they lack the full truth. Because even the thing with the epic story, which is said to be the first written epic story, Gilgamesh, resembles Noah's Ark, what is in the Bible. The Bible is not copying it. It does have the story resembles it. It's very close to it. Sumerian activities in trade and war spread widely in the Middle East. Portions of the Gilgamesh tale appeared in later literature such as the Jewish Bible. That is how you figure it. Which developed well to the west of Sumer. Even after Sumer itself collapsed, the Sumerian language was still used in religious schools and temples, showing the power of this early culture and its decidedly religious emphasis. Wow. Do your reflection and email me. God bless you.